everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology on YouTube. Our music discussion. Dee is not with us this week, as you can see. Bob and I are going to dedicate our music discussion today to the old standby. What are your desert island discs? And I don't know. I thought it'd be fun for Bob and I to do this, and also give you, our viewers, a little bit more insight into what makes each of us tick, depending on what our desert island discs would be. That's a pretty good view into the mind of the person who's presenting it.
And right? I think when today is over, people are going to sit back and go, "How in the hell are those two friends?"
So here's the quick game plan we laid out. We decided to, just for brevity's sake and to keep it within a reasonable amount of time, we're each going to pick three. We've been sent off to a desert island, each of us individually, our own separate island. You know how this goes. And we're allowed to take three albums with us, each of us three albums with us. We decided on three, which we knew that would be tough to narrow it down to three, but just to keep things brief. And we're going to have two honorable mentions each. So we've each winnowed a list down to five. Two of them will be just quick honorable mentions, and then we'll each of us go in turn and talk about what our top three desert island discs would be. And if we have some time at the end, then we'll talk about a few more of them that didn't make the cut for each of us. So Bob, why don't you start us out? Tell me what you've now got your list narrowed down to five. What are the two that you're going to leave behind because you can only take three?
Okay. Love to, Scott, and thank you for letting me go first. Before I do this, I want to do a real quick explanation. When you came up with this idea, and I started thinking about albums, and I had two that popped into my head immediately, and then a third one about 5 minutes later. And I decided that I was going to go with whatever I thought of first and just go with it. I wasn't going to go pouring through all of my collection going, well, should I do this one? Should I do that one? I just made it a gut level and reaction. And I
what probably puts it closer to the truth.
Right.
If you would have thought about it, right? Yep.
So, and now if I were to sit down and spend hours compiling a list, I can't say these five would have made it, but they were the ones I just popped into my head and I said, I'm going to go with it. So that's how I got my choices. All right. So as far as my honorable mentions, first one is Neil Young and Crazy Horse. Everybody knows this is Nowhere.
Hold it up a little bit. There we go. Okay.
This was Neil's second solo album. His first one, simply titled Neil Young, he was kind of neo-folky Neil. And this one, which came out a few months later in 1969, was his first encounter with Crazy Horse. And he's got four of his most classic songs on this album. Cinnamon Girl, Down by the River, everybody knows this is Nowhere, and Cowgirl in the Sand. And I like this album because it sounds like somebody did it in a garage somewhere. It's raw, it's primitive. And if you listen to some Neil Young live albums he released later, he really expands these songs and plays them, much wilder. But this was a kind of a garage type feel. And what is so impressive about those four songs that I just mentioned, Neil wrote those in one day. And he was homesick with 103-degree fever. And while the rest of us may sit down, lie in bed with Netflix, Neil at home with 100-degree fever says, screw it, I'm going to write songs.
Neil was knocking out some guitar jams.
So he wrote those four songs in one day.
Yeah, that's a fabulous album. That is Neil Young and Crazy Horse at their best. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, now like I say, some of the live albums, he does maybe wilder versions of these songs. But yeah, this is a great garage rock album, and I like it because it was that first genesis of Neil Young and Crazy Horse.
There you
So,
go.
yeah, and that was popped into my head. So that's on my alternate list. Okay.
Number two honorable mention.
Number two is Edgar Winter and White Trash with the Roadwork album. And this is a live album, and it features obviously Edgar Winter, his brother Johnny, and Rick Derringer. And it's a live album, 2 LP set, and it's just a fun album to listen to. There's lots of musical genres on here. The album starts out with a song called Save the Planet. It's a song about ecology, but it's got this incredible gospel groove to it. You know, then they segue into doing some straight ahead rock and roll, like Still Alive and Well with Johnny Winter singing, doing guitar. Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, which was a Rick Derringer song. They cover Chuck Berry's Back in the USA. They do some soul music. It's a little bit like Mad Dogs and Englishmen. You know, Edgar Winter's got a horn section with him. It's just a fun album to listen to. And it's never boring because you've got all these different vocalists and all these different genres and styles of music. So real energetic and just fun to listen to.
I pretty much went the same way with you. I had two when I first started thinking about this. Okay, what three do I want to do? And I had my first two were slam dunks. No thought about it involved. You know, I haven't second guessed it. So, and then the third one, there were like two or three, and before I arrived at a third one. But to come up with that third one, I kind of jotted down a real quick list of 10 total records, and then basically eliminated a few of them. And most of these I don't have copies here. I don't have any props to show like Bob, because without going into the whole story, I divested myself of a lot of my old vinyl albums and most all of my CDs at some point recently. But anyway, I have my two honorable mentions, which just barely didn't make the cut of my final three. The first one, and I'll do these in chronological order. My first one is an album from 1989 by The Cure called Disintegration. Just a great. It's to me, it's one of the few perfect albums that are out there. There is absolutely there's no misstep on this album anywhere. It's like an hour long. The Cure. It's Robert Smith holding up after the Cure had been around. They've been around for about 10 years and a few albums. This is something like their 7th or 8th album. I'm not sure exactly how much, but this was basically Robert Smith going into deep depression because his career wasn't going the way he wanted it to go, and he wasn't making the music that he wanted to make. And he grabbed his future wife as his high school sweetheart. He later married her. They went off and rented a house out in the British countryside, and took a nice supply of LSD with them, and started tripping. And Robert Smith wrote this album of songs that are just he's purging himself of this depression and this. And these rather suicidal, melancholy feelings that he was having, and put them all down on vinyl, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant music. I wrote about that on at Geezerology.com quite a while ago about that album. To me, it's one of the best rock albums ever made. My other one that didn't quite make the cut is from 1995. It's Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. Yeah, the old geezer loves this woman. one of the mid 90s weepy singer songwriters, right? But this one is it's kind of in the same vein as Robert Smith's Disintegration. This was Alanis Morissette, who'd been trying to become a little pop star in Canada for a few years, and going through some nasty things in her life. And she finally said, I'm going to move to Los Angeles and I want to write me some songs and I want to make the music that I want to make. And she hooked up with a guy named Glenn Ballard, who helped her write some of this music and produce this music, and produced, to me, one of the best albums that I've heard in my life. Jagged Little Pill. There was a lot of hit singles off of it, and it's become, some of these songs become a bit of a cliche of the pissed off woman singer songwriter in the middle 60s. But this album rocks hard, in my opinion, and I just love it. It's just one of those things where I put it on. Every time I put it on, it gets under my skin, and it takes me on a journey. It's not subject matter that I can really empathize with, because I'm an old guy, and these were the problems of being suffered by a young woman. But man, this music rocks. So I had to put that on there as an honorable mention. It didn't quite make my top 3. Disintegration didn't quite make my top 3, but those two are in my top 5, and that says something. Those are good stuff. Okay, Bob, let's get to the meat of this discussion.
All right.
Your number 3.
My number 3.
In any order you want. I'm not asking you to rank them, just whatever
okay.
order. I'm going to do mine in chronological order of release. So
okay, yeah. All right. I'm going to start out with the debut album by The Doors.
No surprise. No surprise.
No surprise. On any list that I compile, this album would be at the top of that list. And this is the album that changed my life. And I know that's kind of a dramatic thing to say about an album, but it truly did. And prior to discovering this album, my music listening was just based on what I thought was cool. I was in the American Bandstand mode of, yeah, it's got a good beat, man.
Yeah.
So if it sounded cool and the music was kind of great, I listened to it, and I never, it was very superficial. And when I discovered this album, I think I was 17, and I was in a confused state of my life, trying to figure out who I am, where do I belong. I wasn't a jock, so I didn't fit in with those people. I was the son of a carpenter, so I never fit into the socially elite in school. I went to school and did stuff like being on yearbook staff in a high school newspaper drama club. But I never quite fit in there, because as soon as school was out, I was hanging with the freaks. And the freaks always kind of looked at me a little askance because I'm doing non-freak stuff at school. So, I never really belonged anywhere. Uh-huh. And when I heard this album, I loved the music because it was so different and so otherworldly and so unlike anything else that I was listening to at the time. And then I listened to the lyrics, and it was the first time that I looked at rock music as art, as something that could be intellectual, and something that could make you think. And it started with Break On Through. So here's this confused 17-year-old kid who is listening to, Break On Through to the Other Side. And it literally opened my mind up, which I know sounds cliche, but it did. And it led to a lifetime obsession with the Doors. I wrote term papers about this band when I was in high school. Oh, wow. I did a term paper on them in my contemporary issues class. And, the end really wrapped me in itself and in its lyrics. And then parts of the album are fun. 20th Century Fox, it's just a great little song. And it's such a creative play on words, about this hot chick walking down the sidewalk. And this will forever be in my heart, because it is, like I said, it is the album that awakened me in many ways to new things and led me to look at myself. I know that sounds kind of cliched and maybe a little melodramatic, but that's what this album did for me.
It's funny because you're talking about it. It was your first awakening that music can be taken seriously as an art form, and it speaks to people and everything else. I mean, my awakening to that was also a Doors album, but it was just a different Doors album. It was a Soft Parade, which in the intervening years has has not been my favorite Doors album, but that was but yeah, it's the same group, different album as far as I go. Now, am I remembering this wrong? But did you tell me that you heard the Doors debut album retroactively? That it wasn't what do you remember what year it was? Because this album was released in 1967.
Right. And so this would have been probably 72. So
Okay.
yeah, I came to this album later in life.
Through LA Woman, right? Wasn't your
right? Actually, it would have been earlier, 72. Yeah, it was my first real exposure to the Doors was the LA Woman album.
Got it.
And,
okay.
and I liked it. Yeah. And then I liked it enough that ultimately I went back and I picked up this album. And this is the one that just changed everything. And prior to LA Woman, when I was much younger, I mean, I knew Light My Fire, but I heard the short version on AM radio. And it didn't really do much to me. But hearing the extended album cut, and it's not a complicated song, but I still love it. I loved it so much more listening to the expanded version. But it was the message behind Break On Through and The End and some of those songs that just grabbed me.
Yeah.
And it's hard to put into words, but I became a Doors fanatic.
Yeah. Well, as I did after I heard the Soft Parade, that was my entry, and then I went back and listened to all three of their first three albums retroactively. And yeah, and I liked them. It just as we mentioned in our previous discussions of Doors albums, my favorite Doors albums actually turned out to be their last two, Morrison Hotel and LA Woman, but for different reasons. Okay, I'm going to go in chronological order.
Okay.
So my first one, I actually have this one, is a famous Roger Dean cover from 1972, Close to the Edge. Yeah, there's where Roger Dean really brings his thing Close to the Edge on the game.
Yeah.
Yep, there's a back of it. It's pretty standard there.
I remember those elaborate album covers.
Yeah. This was the second album cover that Roger Dean did. The first one was Fragile, which was from 1971. Anyway, Close to the Edge is 1972, and as Bob said, leading up to this was my after, I think it was later in 72, I graduated from high school in 1972. So this was the first big impact that hit me after I got out of high school. I spent pretty much all my high school years pretty much exclusively listening to the Doors. Every once in a while, veering off into, I veered off into Joe Cocker. I veered off into a couple others off the top of my head. I can't remember who all, but I listened to the Doors a lot. Probably 75% of my music listening time was the Doors during my high school years. But I got past that, and all of a sudden in 1971, I discovered Fragile, which was something completely different than anything I'd heard up to that point. I wasn't in tune with the whole Pink Floyd, Canterbury scene, that whole experimental psychedelic stuff that was coming out of England at the time. So Fragile was new to me, and I love Fragile. And then as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Dee and I went to a concert over at Mississippi River Festival over in Edwardsville, Illinois, to see Yes. And this is when both Dee and I were now in tune with Fragile and the Yes album, but it turned out that was their tour promoting Close to the Edge, which hadn't been released yet. The opening song that they did was a song that I'd never heard before called Siberian Katru. And how many times you go to a concert and you hear some new material and, you know, it's oh, what's that? Oh, that was interesting and all, but you don't remember it. But man, that song, the first time I'd ever heard that song was when they took the stage and played that song, and it floored me. I just loved it. Later in the show, they played on You and I also remembered this brand new song on You and I, and You and I later became a radio edit single for them off of this album. But then when this album came out later in the year, in the fall of 1972, I bought this thing and I spent hours listening to this record. I'd never. This is what they started with. The Yes album started messing around with a little experimenting with different time signatures and some virtuosity and things like that, and they really moved into heavily on Fragile. But then Close to the Edge is taking that whole thing to the nth degree, and they made this masterpiece. Probably, to me, this is the album that defines prog rock. And I was a big prog rock fan in the 70s when it was big in the 70s. This is the album that defined that. This is what set the blueprint for that whole prog rock movement in the 70s. I mean, Emerson, Lake and Palmer were doing classically tinged rock at the time, you know, with their debut and with Tarkus and things like that. So this and the Moody Blues and Procol Harum were doing stuff with orchestras and string sections. So this wasn't the first prog rock album. This just to me defined prog rock. This is Yes. They didn't use orchestras like the other ones were doing. They didn't do classical music like the other ones were doing. They didn't do orchestras like the other ones were doing. They just took all that, everything that came before, and they made a rock subgenre out of it, where it was just all guitars and keyboards and drums and bass guitars and voices, and they made a masterpiece. And I will never ever not not be able to listen to this album. I just listened to this straight through about 2 or 3 days ago. And once I put it on, listened to it, I had to listen to it again, listen to it again, listen to it again, listen to it again. It's just great. And this is the first album that just got caught into my DNA, Close to the Edge. And it will always be there for me. Never. They followed this up. Like I said, this was a pinnacle. This was the masterpiece. And because it was so successful, because it was such a great album, then Yes decided to, like, okay, let's take one more step. There were like a couple of steps that led up to this. They decided to go one more step with Tales of Topographic Oceans, and that wasn't Close to the Edge. They went over the edge on that one, and just became a parody with that, and never again did anything as good as this. I talked about last week when I listened to the videos of the 2 videos that they released recently of the new album that they have coming up, and I talked about how I hate comparing it to what has gone before, but it's just hard to do with something that was so good. They will never. Nobody is capable of doing this with prog rock again. Yes is not capable of it. Nobody is capable of it. Nobody's ever done it. And that's my first Desert Island disc, Close to the Edge. And Bob is not a fan, I know.
I never the prog rock movement never really got a foothold with me. There are some individual songs that I really like. You know, you mentioned Procol Harum. I like Whiter Shade of Pale, Conquistador. Emerson, Lake and Palmer did some stuff I like. So there are individual songs here and there, but as a genre, I just never could get into it.
Yeah, I got into it pretty heavy. I mean, all of a sudden after that, there were a lot of them that have since disappeared into obscurity since then. But there were a lot of bands coming out of Germany. There was a band called Triumvirate that I listened to quite a bit. Nectar famously came out with the two-sided single track. You know, they had to break it up into two parts so we could fit on a vinyl record called Remember the Future, which was pretty big at the time. And there were others. When I was going through my record collection and looking for these two albums, I ran across a few albums that I'd forgotten completely about that were from that. It's a band called Gypsy that I just rediscovered when I was going through my album collection, and a few others. It's funny how so many of these bands have just disappeared into obscurity. You don't remember them, but prog rock is still around in different forms. You know, it went through a phase called prog metal, and now now actually the 70s prog has had a resurgence in the last few years with people revisiting that, and people like Steven Wilson has remastered all these albums, and a lot of prog bands are starting to make some noise over across the pond again these days. But anyway, yep, that's enough of that. I've enough of Close to the Edge. What's your next one, Bob?
Okay, being conventional again. My next one is Bruce Springsteen's The River album. This album came out in 1980. It's a double album set. Of course, you know, Bruce Springsteen became an incredible sensation with his Born to Run album. And then he followed it up with Darkness on the Edge of Town, and then had some contractual issues that kept him from releasing anything for like 2 or 3 years. So The River actually could have been 2 separate albums, but like I say, he couldn't release anything there for a few years. So when he did come back, he came back with a double album. I remember where I got this. I bought this from a record store in Oklahoma City. And a buddy of mine there who was a copy editor on the same newspaper I worked at, we had a Friday thing. Every Friday we'd go out, do lunch, and then spend the afternoon going to record stores and then go into work, you know, because we were a morning edition paper. So I bought this when I was out scrounging record stores with Chuck, bought it when it first came out, went home to my apartment, and I put this on the turntable. And the title song, The River, and another song on here called Independence Day. I felt like Bruce Springsteen was singing and writing about me. And backing up, when I was a senior in high school, one of my best buddies was dating this girl. And I was also thought I was in love with her. And they had kind of off again, on again, off again relationship. He was really only with her because, you know, of sex. It wasn't that he had any deep feelings for her. And I became friends with her, and she would call me to talk about my friend. And so I was in the middle of this whole thing. And they broke up, and I thought, hey, here's my chance. So I asked her out, and I got the classic line of, oh, Bob, I think of you as a brother, you know. So anyway, my friend and I started college together. He hooked back up with her, and the story ends with her getting pregnant. And he dropped out of school and got a job working at a grocery store, and they wound up living in a mobile home, and at the tender age of 19 or 20. And I remember I was his best man at the thrown together wedding with a handful of people. And of course, you know, we know how the story ends. They ultimately got divorced and everything. So all of these lives, you know, got ruined because of what happened. And The River tells a story about a teenage boy and girl, and they're going down to the river and skinny dipping and swimming and everything. And then Mary gets pregnant. And of course, they have to put their lives on hold to get married. And he's got a line in the song where the boy sings, "For my 19th birthday, I got a union card and a wedding coat." And then, of course, the song continues on with, you know, the marriage deteriorating and everything falling apart. And when I heard that song, I immediately thought back to my friend and what happened with him. And every time that I hear this song since, I think about my friend, and I also think, for the grace of God, that could have been me. So that song just resonated with me from the very first time I heard it. And I even used the song, I played it for my daughters when they were old enough to understand the whole thing, and played the song for them, told them the story about my friend and everything that happened. Then the other song that grabbed me when I first heard this album is Independence Day. And Springsteen had kind of a similar relationship with his dad that I had with mine. And in the song Independence Day, the young man is saying goodbye to his dad. I'm moving out, I'm leaving home, I'm going off on my own. And, you know, we can't live together. And it goes into the whole emotions about the father-son relationship. And it just mirrored exactly what I had gone through when I moved away from home. My thoughts about, I got to get away from here. I don't ever want to come back. And I didn't come back unless, you know, when I absolutely had to. And so both of those songs just resonate with me on an incredibly intense personal level. And this is when I really became a big Bruce Springsteen fan, based on those two songs. And there are other cuts on here that are really good, and there's a lot of Springsteen classics on here. But those were the two that just reached out and grabbed me. And I can, every time I listen to them, even all of these decades later, I still get that same feeling that I had the very first time I listened to them, a reflection on aspects of my life.
So you want to spend the rest of your life on a desert island, just reliving all these horrible moments over and
well,
over?
They were horrible, but at the same time, they were defining moments, if that makes sense. You know, I was 20 years old, you know, when I moved away from home, and it was the first time in my life that I was out from under, you know, the shadow of my dad. So it was a liberating moment. And then the song about the river, it's a bittersweet song. And so so maybe it sounds morbid, but it's just impactful. But there are also lots of songs on this album that are positive and uplifting. Okay. And Independence Day in its way is uplifting. You know, it's a young man getting his independence. And that's what I got, you know, when I moved away. So just deeply personal songs.
Yeah.
And you know, why do I want to relive that?
That's legit. It's just that thought occurred to me. It's like, oh my God, these low troughs in your life, and now you want to go to a desert island and just relive them over and over and over again. Yeah, Springsteen was just in the news yesterday. He perform at one of the 9/11 memorials. The
Yes.
one in New York, I guess. You know, there was another one in Pennsylvania, but I guess he was at the 9/11 one.
Yeah, he did. I'll see you in my dreams at one of the 9/11 ceremony. And of course, Springsteen is linked to 9/11 with his album The Rising. You know, and he wrote that specifically about the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah. As we've discussed this before.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. Springsteen is one of these guys where you know, if I heard a collection of his greatest hits, that's all I need to hear from Bruce Springsteen. And even that might be a little more Bruce Springsteen than I need. It just never, I just never took to the guy. I never took to the guy. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of somebody who one of us never took to, my number two is going to be from 1979. Lou Reed's, I don't have a copy of this. I looked for it and I couldn't find it. Lou Reed's The Blue Mask, which was his, about his 8th album. It was his return to RCA Records, actually, after a break from that. This was, The Blue Mask was, and if you look at critical reviews of Lou Reed's career and his discography, The Blue Mask never does really turn up really highly rated on most professional writers and critics, but it's from the day that I first heard this in 1979 until today, it's by far my favorite Lou Reed album. And in fact, when I was thinking about my my Desert Island discs, there were two that immediately came to mind, and there were two slam dunks. One of them was Close to the Edge, and one of them was The Blue Mask. No question. This was Lou after he spent his the bigger part of the 70s doing the whole rock and roll animal speed freak cartoon character thing. The Blue Mask was not his return. His previous album called Growing Up in Public was basically Lou all of a sudden becoming real Lou instead of cartoon Lou. He started writing songs that were close to his heart, but The Blue Mask is the one that just came full flower. He dropped the big bands, he dropped the horns. You know, he was playing around with soul music. He was playing around with he was going to big band. He was just going on stage and singing. He wasn't playing guitar or anything. Well, this is Lou getting back to basics. Basically continuing where he left off with the Velvet Underground. He just found himself a guitar player in Robert Quine, a bass player, and Fernando Saunders, who stayed with Lou for the rest of his career for the most part, and then a young drummer named Dwayne Perry. Quine was a guy who he was a former guitar player for the Voidoids, and Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and he was a big Velvet Underground fan when he was a kid, and he made a lot of tapes and released a lot of bootleg albums of the Velvet Underground from his tapes. So he was a big guy. So Lou hired him to come in, and he inspired Lou to start playing the guitar. And the guitar play. This is a guitar album. The guitar play between Quine and Reed, they're so similar. And they're not Eric Clapton sort of, lead flashy guitar players. It's just two guys just getting the most distorted but yet in tune sounds out of their guitars that you can get, both of them doing this, one in the left channel, one in the right channel, and just playing basic rock and roll songs. And these are songs about Lou's personal life. He just got married to Sylvia Reed. And my favorite Lou Reed track of all time is a closing song on this album called Heavenly Arms, where this is Reed just going full on doo-wop, going back to his doo-wop roots, the stuff that inspired him when he was a kid, on top of Quine's and Reed's squealing, distorted, nasty guitar work. So it's like the 1979 guitar work, putting a doo-wop on top of that with his most emotional yet off-key vocals on top of it, and then Fernando Saunders doing the falsetto harmonies in the background. It's just a great song, and it's a love song to his new wife Sylvia. great song, great song. It's one. If I had to make a list of desert island songs, where I had to could only take 5 songs with me, Heavenly Arms would definitely be at the top of that list, as would Siberian Khatru from the Yes album. Anyway, that was Lou Reed at his finest to me. He sings about his new life out in the Jersey countryside and his big new house that he and Sylvia bought. He also has a few songs on there where he gets pretty violent about exercising his demons. He's got a song on there called Underneath the Bottle, where he talks about battling his alcoholism. And one of the highlights of the tune of the song of the album is the song called "The Day John Kennedy Died," which is his remembrance of the day John Kennedy died. That happened to be that was the first. If you think about the first news story that you remember when you were a kid, that was my first one, was Kennedy's assassination. So there's always a piece of my heart that's tied to the Kennedy assassination, and then Lou sings about that on the day John Kennedy died, which is the kind of song, which is the song I would have written if I were a songwriter about that day. Great tune, fabulous album. It's a 5-star Lou Reed album. And it is the Lou Reed album. As everybody who knows me knows that I was a Lou Reed super fan for decades, especially back during the 70s and into the 80s. I just walked, talked, breathed, and ate Lou Reed, all the time. And this was it. This was the pinnacle of my relationship with Lou Reed, was the Blue Mask.
Interesting. I'm going to have to listen to this album. You paint a pretty good picture of it.
Yeah, it's and the cover of it too. I'll have a cover of it and I'll put it on in post production on the video. But it's the same Mick Rock photo that was on the cover of Transformer, but there's a blue tint on his face. I guess a black background. And it's kind of a signal that, okay, this is Lou. The Transformer up to that time was Lou's biggest success, and this was Lou like throwing all this journey, all this stuff that he started doing in the interim. He's just throwing this all away, and he was going back to the music that brought him to this point. And it's without question, it's the best band that Lou played with during his solo career. Quine was his best collaborator in his solo career by most everybody's accounts. And just like what happened with Lou and his big collaborators, that collaboration didn't last very long. Lou kind of screwed him over. The story of Quine was a lawyer. He got his Juris Doctorate from Washington University in St. Louis, and he decided after he got his law degree that and he passed the bar, he didn't want to be a lawyer, and he started playing the guitar. Inspired by his love of the Velvet Underground during his college days, he decided he was going to be Lou Reed, right? And he hooked up with Richard Hell and the Voidoids and did very well there. And he became a career session guitarist, but he's most well known for this album. This was a pinnacle of his career. It's a great guitar album. And but Lou Reed style guitar, not your traditional rock guitar. It's more like Lamont Young sort of guitar album, just a lot of dissonance and squealing and things that fit into basic rock songs. And they did a follow-up album called Legendary Hearts with the same band. And Lou, by this time, Quine was getting a lot of press. He's getting a lot of credit for putting Lou back on track and for making such a great album. And so when Lou self-produced the follow-up album, Legendary Hearts, and he sent an advance copy to Quine. He sent a cassette tape of the finished album before it was released to Quine for Quine to listen to it. And he had mixed Quine so far down into the mix of that album that you couldn't even hear him most of the time. It was just basic. All you can hear was Lou's guitar. You couldn't hear Quine's guitar very much at all in it. And Quine got it and he listened to it and he got so mad. The story is that he went and got a hammer and just smashed this cassette tape to bits with his hammer. And he was done. But he was already he ended up touring with Reed, did a worldwide tour with Reed, following up on the Legendary Hearts album. But he was already obliged to do it contractually, so he did it for the money. He wasn't happy about going on that tour because he had his fill of Reed at this point, which tended to happen to Reed over the course of his life with anybody who got too close to him. He's kind of Trump in that way. Nobody else can get credit. Lou gets all the credit. Somebody else gets any credit, then he gets rid of them. He can't have it. And but anyway, the Blue Mask. To me, I mean, if anybody has never heard a Lou Reed album, I would say that this is the first Lou Reed album to listen to. It's the first and it's the best, and it's Lou Reed at his best. It's Lou Reed as the most basic and very close to what it was that made Lou Reed great over a long period of time. This is the album that best showcases the traits that made Lou Reed great, both in his songwriting and in his performance.
Well, I way back in the day, and I've told you this before, way back in the day, I knew the Velvet Underground songs like White Light, White Heat, Waiting for My Man, and Heroin, and I thought they were great songs. But the musical delivery always kind of struck me as a little amateurish, so I never got into the band. And then when the Velvets broke up and Lou Reed went solo, of course, I knew Walk on the Wild Side because everybody knew it back in that day. Right. It was kind of daring and really different and risque. But I never dug into Reed as a solo artist, and I never dug into the Velvets until you finally persuaded me to listen to Loaded, their last album, and I just fell in love with that album. So, Loaded is now, in my collection, and based on what you said about this, I mean, I love that album.
Yeah,
and it's,
I didn't know you actually added it to your collection.
Oh yeah, I went out and got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I downloaded it, so it's it's in my iTunes. And so, based on how you describe this, I think I'm going to get a listen to it because it sounds
and when you do, play it as loud as your equipment will allow you to play it.
Well, I still have these great big floor speakers back from the late 70s.
Oh, there you go.
I can crank it up.
Make sure that the women aren't home. Clear the house of all the women and maybe the dogs too.
You mentioned the song about
and drop that on and play it through and play it as loud as you can stand it.
I'll give it a listen to and I'll let you know what I thought.
So, Bob, what's your third one?
Okay. This is going to emphasize, again, the deep differences you and I have at our core on music. And my next choice is Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, their Uncle Charlie album. And I know this is something that's not going to be in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, you and I went off in different directions after we met at the Doors, right?
Yeah, we did. Anyway, a brief history. The Dirt Band formed in California in the early 1960s. And they started out, ironically, as a jug band. and they released 3 albums, 2 studio and 1 live album, had a minor hit called Buy For Me the Rain, and then they made an appearance in the Lee Marvin, Clint Eastwood musical, Paint Your Wagon. Then the band broke up, and they eventually reformed with some new members and released this album in 1967. And this is like, to the Dirt Band, this album is what Born to Run was to Springsteen. It broke them out to a national prominence because they had a huge hit with their cover of Jerry Jeff Walker's Mr. Bojangles, which is a very beautiful song, kind of bittersweet, but beautiful, about a Black man who traveled all through the South, dancing at bars and fairs and stuff like that for pocket change and drinks. And he traveled around with his dog. And the song gets into, the dog dying, and 20 years later, the man still grieves. The song was written by Jerry Jeff Walker, reportedly after Walker got thrown into the drunk tank at a jail in New Orleans. And he actually met the Black man that the song was based on. The way the Dirt Band came to record it is a really interesting story. They had just had a new person join them named Jimmy Ibbotson, and he had just graduated from DePaul University, moved out west, and joined the band. And they're in the studio recording this album. And Jeff Hanna, one of the band members, came into the studio and said, "Hey, I just heard this really cool song on the radio about a Black man who dances." And Jimmy Ibbotson said, "I've got that 45. And he goes out to his car and rummages through all of the stuff in the trunk of his car, because he's literally just driven across country. And he pulls out this 45. They take it in there and they listen to it, and they play it over and over and over on the turntable, working out their own version of it. And it became a national hit for them. And so I've always loved that song. And this is an album that is just fun. Every time I listen to it, I feel good. And I have every album this band ever released. I've seen them live probably 10 times at least. And I love virtually everything they do. This album has an incredible variety of music. They've got bluegrass on here. They do rock. They've got some classical banjo, of all things, just a lot of styles. And they showcased some young writers who had some great songs. They have songs in here by Mike Nesmith, who was from the Monkees, Kenny Loggins. They cover some Buddy Holly stuff, Jerry Jeff Walker. And like I said, it's just fun to listen to. And they actually managed, to put a bluegrass banjo into rock music. And they do a Kenny Loggins song called House at Pooh Corner. And it's literally a song about Winnie the Pooh and all the characters from that, And if you grew up with Winnie the Pooh, it just brings back all of these incredible childhood memories. And I just love the album, and I can listen to it over and over and over again. And like I said, I just feel good. And there's nothing wrong with feeling good.
Yeah.
It just makes me happy.
Well, if you can listen to it over and over and over again, that'll serve you pretty well then on that desert
island. On a desert island. Yes. And it's called Uncle Charlie because this picture of the old guy on the back of the album and, on the front, excuse me, John McEwen was one of the members of the band, and his brother was their manager. And his brother was also the manager for Steve Martin and a lot of other acts. And years before, they had gone to visit this old relative of theirs, and they took a tape recorder along, and they just recorded the guy talking about his life. And, he talks about how he grew up and all that kind of stuff. And he's got the dog with him, and the old man pulls out a harmonica, and he starts playing the harmonica, and the dog sings along with him. So they've got a couple things on here where they play the recording of their Uncle Charlie, which is where the name of the album came from. And so it's kind of neat to listen.
What was the year of release for this album?
1967.
Okay.
And so they are they're really good musicians. There's a lot of variety to the album because they've got multiple vocalists, and they had 2 lead vocalists, and then their drummer also sang some. So there's variety to it. You're not hearing the same singer over and over again. And, as I said earlier, it ranges from bluegrass to rock, with some country thrown in there. And there's one song on here, Prodigal's Return. And they did it's kind of a political song based on, the times of the 1960s, but it's built around the story of the prodigal son in the Bible. And I always liked that one because it was very topical and spoke a lot about the times that we were in back then. And John McEwen, who plays banjo and fiddle and some other things on here, just an incredible musician. He's called the string wizard because he plays so many different stringed instruments. And he does some classical interpretations on some of the instrumentals on here. And then there are times they just really rock out on here. So
is this the band, am I remembering this correctly? Is this the band that Steve Martin used to sit in with every now and then?
Yes. Yeah. And you remember Steve Martin's novelty hit, King Tut?
Right.
Yeah. The Dirt Band was the band that played on that cut.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they called themselves the Toot Uncommons on the song.
Yeah.
Like I say, they shared a manager in John McEwen's brother. And actually, John McEwen and Steve Martin were childhood friends.
Yeah.
And they went to school together out in California and also worked together as teenagers at the Magic Shop in, I don't know if it's Disneyland or Disney World in California. And
Disneyland, yeah.
Yeah. And John McEwen actually taught Steve Martin how to play the banjo.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So they got and it was William McEwen. That was the brother who was the manager for Steve Martin.
Got it.
So they've got that connection there.
Yeah. Yeah, I have zero background with Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. I've heard of them. I remember their Mr. Bojangles. I remember that. But other than that, it's just the fact I know the name of the band, but that's all the background I have with them.
Well, I know this is in a genre that I know that is not in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. When you're talking banjos and
So, but I still have my country influences, and so I love their music. Jimmy Ibbotson, I think, is probably one of the best country style vocalists ever. And Jeff Hanna, the other lead vocalist, he's also a great singer. And they don't have any original material on this album, okay? But later on, they wrote their own songs, and back in the 1980s, when they became a little bit more of a country band, I mean, they ruled country. They had just incredible string of #1 hits, on the countryside. And, they did that legendary Will the Circle Be Unbroken album.
Right. I do know of that. I'm not familiar with it, but I know of that one. See my new T-shirt?
Interesting.
I bought this off Amazon a while ago. It took a while to get here. It's just coincidence that it showed up at the time it did. I thought, oh, perfect timing.
Yeah.
My number 3 from 1980, Peter Gabriel. This is Peter Gabriel's third solo album. Third one just titled Peter Gabriel, which later became known as Melt because of that cover photo. There's the back of it right there. It's a more straight ahead one. This is just a quick note in this cover while I have it up here. This was an accident. This was I don't know who the photographer was on this or who the album designer was, but this is just, this came from that same photo shoot. But this happened in the developing process. The photographer screwed it up when he was developing it, and just messed up that one side over there. Yeah, just messed that up, and Gabriel saw that and said, "That's my cover." and it's perfect, and it's a perfect indicator of what is on the vinyl here. This is Gabriel. Now he's just starting his move into and doing world music. With relying a lot on African rhythms and different kind of sounds that he was discovering when he was out traveling the world and starting this WOMAD Music Festival that he started back about this time. And all these songs are just about human mental breakdowns. The first side, side one, is a collection of songs, and I just realized as I was listening to this again the other day that there's a distinct difference between the songs on side one and the songs on side two. The songs on side one are about these people with some deep-seated mental problems. The opening track is Intruder, about this guy who just gets off on burglarizing people's homes when they're at home asleep. He's got a song called I Don't Remember, about a guy who has some sort of amnesia thing. He remembers nothing about who he was or where he came from. He has a song on there called Family Snapshot, about inside the mind and telling the story of how a guy becomes a political assassination. It was probably like a combination of Lee Harvey Oswald and Travis Bickle, is a story that he tells in the song. And then which I think kind of goes to what this photo is. It's just a breakdown of the human spirit, And side two is more sociological. Side two, he has a song which was one of his earliest singles, "Games Without Frontiers," which is about the soldiers fighting the war in Argentina at the time. He has a song on side two called "You're Not One of Us," which kind of deals with the apartheid that was going on in South Africa at the time. And then the most famous song on this album, which wasn't at the time but later became the enduring legacy of this album, was a song called Biko, which is Gabriel, all in his time in Genesis. When Gabriel was in Genesis, they just sang these stories, these bizarre story songs from, basically set in Victorian England or whatever. It's just fiction, and Gabriel broke away from that. Well, Biko was really the first political song that he ever wrote, which is a story that he was following in the news. About a black civil rights activist in South Africa who got arrested, and the police held him in jail for a few times, and apparently it was kind of a high profile story at the time, and then it's one day all of a sudden we found out that Biko died from all the beatings that he took while he was in jail with the white police officers. So Gabriel wrote and recorded this song, and I didn't know this whole story at the time when I first heard this album, and this immediately just the sound of the song and the story that it was telling, it became one of my favorite songs of all time. Going back to Desert Island tracks that I would have, it was like if I made a list of 10 of them, about 3 of them would come from this album. And Biko, when that was released and when it got out there, that became sort of the prompt for Amnesty International heard that song, and it kind of inspired the people at Amnesty International to jump on the charity concert, big time concert bandwagon, and do a tour to benefit their civil rights activism. They contacted Gabriel, asked Gabriel if he would go on this tour with them and do Biko as their closing song, which he decided to do. It became a huge show closer for his concerts for several years after that. And he went on that Human Rights Now tour with Amnesty International, specifically to close the show with that song Biko, and that led Gabriel to become this big human rights activist, which he's been ever since then. So we talked about in a previous video about the song music that changed everything. This is a song that changed a lot, both in global political circles and personally for Gabriel. That song changed his life. This album is it's just great. I mean, it's not a prog rock album. Obviously, Gabriel came out of the 70s prog rock movement. He was one of he and Genesis were among the superstars in the 70s prog rock. And this was Gabriel's third album. I'd been following him since the Genesis days. I bought and loved his first album. I bought and liked his second album. The second album was okay. It wasn't great, but when this one came out, it blew my mind. The 1980s, it was near the end of my vinyl days before I moved into CD. So this was one of the last vinyl albums that I bought that I fell in love with, and this thing has stuck with me ever since then. And it's just because the music is again, we're talking about it. It's different than what I had ever listened to before, because it's just pretty heavily. It's really heavy on the rhythm. All these songs are built around these rhythms. He developed these rhythms and then built songs around these rhythms, and came up with these wonderful tracks. Among the three tracks that I would take with Desert Island are the opener, Intruder, which is built around a Phil Collins drum solo, and is actually, people say, and I don't know enough about how this works, so I don't know how much to take this to heart, but supposedly the whole drum sound of the 1980s came out of this track Intruder, which listen to one of the things that Gabriel's he made a rule on his drummers. Collins, there were three different drummers that he used on this album, but Collins was on Intruder, and he told them that he does not want any snare drums used. He doesn't want to use snare drums. He doesn't want to use hi-hats. He just wants that Maureen Tucker, like just pounding on the drums. He didn't want the high percussion, because he all just wanted that deep rhythm going on. And so Collins and the producer Hugh Padgham, they're saying, Collins saying, I can't get enough volume out of this. If I'm not using snare drums, I needed volume. So they rigged up a microphone to put it like directly inside the drums, just to get some volume out of it. And it just made this really, really deep, harsh sound, which was fine on the bass drums. But then Collins took that to Genesis And then out of that grew this whole drum machine, sort of synthetic drum sound that became so prevalent in the 80s, which I complained about on that one video we did on the John Mellencamp album. I think the problem is that this is a good idea and it worked and it sounded really good here. But the problem is when Colin took it back to Genesis, he put the snare drums back in it and just made it sound so harsh to me to be horrible. But anyway, Intruders, where that came from, that's one of my favorite tracks of all time. Family Snapshot, the one that's just Gabriel sitting at a piano singing about the assassination, the assassin and what's going through the assassin's mind. Always been one of my favorite tracks. And Biko. Beautiful album, wonderful album. It was the best thing that Gabriel has done in his career. No question in my mind. I think most Gabriel fans and most critics will have this album at the top, ranked at the top of his career. So, which came 6 years later and was 2 albums later, was his most successful one and the one that propelled him into superstardom. But at this time, he was just a cult artist. But this is without question Gabriel's best work, and and the one that I've loved since the day I've heard it. It's just wonderful stuff. And Gabriel is such such an innovative and imaginative character that this album just really sings. And it made African music and world-based music palatable to some of us masses who were listening to him. He brought us into that world with him, and it's wonderful stuff. This festival that he started at the time, the World Festival he started at the time, is called WOMAD, World of Music and Dance, which has been an annual event every year for the last 40 years, except last year they didn't have it because of the pandemic. But yeah, he started that, and then shortly after that, with Biko, is when he became this global human activist superstar, and then a few years later he became a musical superstar. But yep, Peter Gabriel, not Peter Gabriel, but Peter Gabriel, otherwise known as Melt.
All right. Well, I have 2 albums now I'm going to have to go listen to based on your descriptions.
Yeah.
Did you say Games Without Frontiers is on there?
Games Without Frontiers is on. That was a single. I don't know if it ever cracked the top 40.
But I remember that song.
Yeah, it got some radio play. It was not his first single. Salisbury Hill from his debut album became a signature tune for him, but it was never really a hit single. It just became a hit tune for him. And Games and Frontiers was one of those. It was just kind of always bubbled under the surface. It got a bit of radio play. And then on the following album, on the Peter Gabriel album, on the 4th Peter Gabriel album, was Shock the Monkey, and that was the first one I think that cracked the top 40, and then a couple years later, then So kind of propulsed him into the upper echelon.
Yeah, I remember hearing Games Without Frontiers on the radio, and I liked it enough that I always turned up the volume whenever I heard it. Yeah. But it didn't compel me enough to, dig into any of his albums.
Yeah, that's probably in the mainstream as far as radio play and all that goes. Games Without Frontiers is the most well-known song in this album, but Biko is the one tune it's got a huge legacy. Yeah.
Well, I like message songs, so I'm gonna have to check that out.
Oh, you might find a lot. You might find something to like about this. This is yeah. And I was thinking, wow, it's like I'm gonna take this record on a desert island. I mean, listen to some of these songs.
Yeah, I mean,
listen to some of these songs over and over and over again on a desert island for the rest of my life. I mean, there's some insanity that's going to creep in there,
Yeah. I was going to say, you called me out for wanting to listen to a song about, what happened to my friend. And I'm sitting here thinking, wow, you want to take an album to a desert island with psychological issues?
Yeah. And what it is all these songs are about these different mental health issues, but they're sung from the point of view of the person suffering these issues, right? The intruder is the guy who just gets off on doing home invasions, he likes to creep across creaky wooden floors, and he hears your breath as you're sleeping in the other room, knowing that that he's there. No self-control is a guy who just he has no filters. I don't remember is the guy trying to figure out who he is, what he's all about. Family Snapshot is the assassin, and Through the Wire is a guy trying to communicate through through the wire. Games Without Frontiers then is the second side is more sociological. Games Without Frontiers is about soldier fighting in the war. Not One of Us is the mob telling somebody to go away. You don't belong here. Go away. Lead a Normal Life is somebody who's just trying to fit into society, and then Biko is the story of the guy who Stephen Biko, who got killed by the South African police. You might find a lot, even if you don't like the music. I think you'll enjoy the messages of these songs. You'll enjoy the stories. Yeah.
I know about Stephen Biko and the apartheid and everything. So I would be interested in that.
And those are my 3 desert island discs. And man, we went on a while. But Bob, just real quick, we don't need to talk about. Just give me a few titles of things that just didn't make your cut.
Didn't make my cut. Okay. Yeah. Gabriel. After I thought up my first 5, I thought about the Guess Who's Share the Land album, or the Guess Who's American Woman album. Harry Chapin popped into my head because I love his message songs. He actually did a song about the sniper who went to the college in Texas and killed all those people. Led Zeppelin popped in there.
I considered CTA, Chicago Transit Authority. I considered Roxy Music's Siren. I considered Ashes Are Burning by Renaissance. I considered Absolutely Live by The Doors. And I considered Genya Raven's Urban Desire.
Yeah. And I almost put Morrison Hotel in my 5. And I didn't because we had just talked about it last week. But after listening to it, and I hadn't really gone through the whole album for quite a while. Listening to it over again, I just realized what I realized what a fantastic album it is. It
hurt me not to put a Doors album in there, but actually the one that is closest to my heart is Absolutely Live. That's the first one that I just fell absolutely madly in love with, and I still like it. And I just listened to it last night, trying to winnow down this list. And as I was listening to it, it just didn't quite get to the level of these other ones that did make the cut. But anyway, that's our Desert Island disc. Thanks for spending all this time with us. That went on a little long, but hopefully you'll find something to enjoy and something to learn a little bit about us with this. We'll be back next week with another edition of this coming Sunday with another edition of the Geezerology Gazette, and then next Wednesday we're going to be joined by Marissa, and I believe D. And we're going to listen to a favorite of Marissa's by the 1975. And it's a long title on this album. I don't have the title of the album in front of me, but it's by the band called the 1975. I've never heard of them till Marissa suggested them. I've listened to this album a couple of times, and it's some good stuff. So we're going to talk about that next week with Marissa. In the meantime, happy weekend, everybody. So long.
Take care.